I first met Rob and Doug in Oxford Street. They were sweeping it at the top.
It was always our ambition, Doug and mine, to have our own sitcom.
There was something new about the whole thing.
It was groundbreaking, it was different.
Original, innovative.
Fabulous, but it was a space comedy, for God's sake.
Rob and I both had this kind of half feeling that people would go, "Oi, what are you doing? You know, you shouldn't be here."
We really didn't know what we were doing.
My major concern was I didn't think it was that funny. And when we were doing the read-throughs and things like that, and people like the writers, Doug and Rob, and the people in the rehearsal room, the laughter seemed really forced. They seemed to be laughing in the places they thought that people would laugh. But to me, I was thinking, what are they laughing at,
The part eventually goes to Craig, who it turns out doesn't think it's funny, but Craig needed the comfort blanket of jokes, and there weren't too many there.
I thought the first script was great. There were others who didn't, but I thought the first script was great. Fred Molina thought it was good. Alan Rickman thought it was good.
Paul Jackson gave me the script. I phoned back and said, give me that part. But the only reason was not because I thought it was like, this is absolutely brilliant. It was because Paul Jackson was doing it. And if Paul Jackson was doing it, if he was leaving something like Saturday Night Live and all that, to go and do this, having done the young ones and having had the sort of career that Paul's had and made some of the best decisions in TV that Paul had, I thought, if I can just get on his shirt tails and I can maybe surf along in the glory, do you know what I mean? And that I'm being genuinely honest now.
If my memory serves me correctly, which it probably doesn't, is that Series 1 never happened initially. There was a strike.
We were all aware, as BBC staff members, that there was a dispute in the offing, and indeed that boiled over, and industrial action was taken by the electricians that pretty well brought the whole of the BBC right across the country to a standstill.
So each week we were kind of waiting to be told if the studio would be crewed up and manned or not. And we did a couple of weeks of rehearsing the first episode and getting stood down on the Thursday of the weekend or whatever. So we started then rehearsing the second and the third each week to go in and make that one each week. And in the end, I think I'm right in saying we rehearsed all 6. Never shot one of them.
It was stopped as far as the camera was concerned. In every other respect, it was still going on. We had to work it that way in case the strike was turned off.
The electricians just walked out. So we tried shooting it by everybody lighting matches. That wasn't involved in the actual shot. If you weren't actually in the scene, you'd light matches and hold them until they burned out and everything.
Every week we would say, well, we can record 2 at the end, or we'll do bits of them. But we got halfway through and we thought, there's no way of catching this up. And we honestly thought that was probably it.
I've just got my first TV series, and 6 weeks later, I haven't filmed a frame of comedy. So I thought this was it, devastating.
I thought, that's my higher power. That's a sign from above that this was an absolute turkey. Get yourself out of the wreckage straight away.
But the good thing was we'd done enough of it, and other people, Peter and other bosses from the BBC, had been in and seen it in the rehearsal room. And I think people more and more started to get it.
Then we got another phone call from Paul saying, no, we're going to remount.
We shot the thing, and the rest is history. Well, I mean, what's history really is like Runnybrook and, the Magna Carta and stuff. It doesn't compare to that.
Alexandra Pig was the first Kachansky, but because of a strike, by the time we actually came to make Red Dwarf, she wasn't free anymore. She was hot in a showbiz way because she'd been in Letter to Brezhnev, so she'd been in a movie. Ugh, sexy.
Strong, striking woman to play Kachansky, and that's how I always saw the role. So whoever played Kachansky was never the Kachansky that I'd envisaged.
The reason we got Claire Grogan is because she was feisty and funny, but she wasn't a stand-up comedian who everybody had seen, but she was in a very successful movie, Gregory's Girl, and she was also in a band.
The way we'd originally conceptualized the arc with Lister and Kachansky was that we'd probably bring Kachansky back. But again, we were limited with what was working and what was not working. And Craig, certainly at the time, did not appear that he could be a kind of romantic lead.
I'm in a terrible cock-up. I'm going to own up to this probably for the first time. Claire Grogan played Kachansky, and there was 2 Claire Grogans in Spotlight, and I thought, well, it's a 50-50 chance, because the photographs were similar, and I phoned up the wrong one. And the wrong Claire Grogan was about to get on to a train to come up to be interviewed by me in Manchester, because I was in a production office there at the time, and I thought, I'd just double-check this. I phoned the agent, and I went, "You're Claire Grogan." Of course, she was in Gregory's Girl, wasn't she? "No, that's the other one." People were dispatched. There were no mobiles then. People were dispatched to stop her getting on the train. I'm very sorry, other Claire Grogan.
Ed Byer had worked with us on several shows. He'd just, I think, come off 3 of a Kind we'd done together.
Well, I think everyone responded quite positively because, you know, he'd been schooled by Paul Jackson.
Paul is the kind of guy, if he likes you and you don't let him down, he'll stick with you. He's a stick-with-you kind of guy. And so he said, you know, I want Ed to do this. And we said, well, we know Ed, we like him a lot. He's a great bloke to have a drink with. Don't know if he can direct. Great, let's have him.
He actually got it with a passion. I mean, he really, from day one, loved the project and begged us, really. Said, look, Paul, please let me work on this. Please let me do this.
He wasn't anything like BBC directors of the day that I'd come across.
It's a very difficult balance. You have to strike when you're a director, you have to get on with people, but you have to be the boss. And Ed was great at that, because it wasn't an easy group of actors to get on with and be the boss.
The great thing about Ed was when you said something, you know, something he didn't quite like, his eyes would look above your head. They wouldn't look at your eyes, they'd look at your... So he'd sort of say, I think there is a reason for doing that, but maybe not here.
He used to do this a lot. He used to go around and looking at the shot. He'd go around like that. He did it a lot. He did it in his lunch break as well, looking at shots, the lady serving, you know, oh, that's a good shot, that'll make a good shot.
Ed and Paul Jackson were obviously the good cop, bad cop, you know. Ed is kind of a tall, gangly, naturally funny, likeable, kind of sort of amenable kind of chap, do you know what I mean? He'll sort of cajole and coerce and try and get the best out of you like that. Was Paul coming and go, do it now!
I was working in this area with these new young comics, and so I was kind of the grown-up, and I was so not ready to be a grown-up. I can't remember, I was 30-something maybe. And so I'd be there at 3 o'clock in the morning in the curry house with the lager going down, and then I had to get it together. So when it was 8 o'clock and time to turn over and somebody hadn't turned up yet, or the location wasn't properly set up, that was quite serious for me, except I'd have as bad a hangover as everybody else. George, sorry to be stupid, why aren't the scutters just here anyway? Is it really essential that they have to be...
Well, the idea was that they came in with...
Yeah, but it's not working, is it? We don't see them. And can't they just be here all along anyway? I mean, we're not seeing them that they're following Lister in anyway.
Yeah, he's just saying he's going to pick it up. Where from it?
That was great. Right. That was great. That was dead right.
There's this great myth that, you know, he puts the fear of God into people, you know, as a producer-director and, you know, top man in terms of producing television shows. And people who say that are absolutely right.
But that's quite good, because you've got that in the background, you know. When all else fails, light blue touch paper and watch him fly.
I was young, I was successful, I had all this money, I had all these experiences that I felt I needed to experience, you know, and a lot of them keep you up late. Do you know what I mean? In fact, a lot of them mean you don't go to bed at all.
They were quite a difficult cast to manage. I mean, you had some characters here. So, yeah, we did slightly play it. I would lay the law down, and then Ed would say, look, don't piss him off, because we're just all going to have a terrible day if you wind him up. Please turn up on time tomorrow, because, you know, I get it in the ear from him if he's in a bad mood. So can we just all try a bit harder?
You can't camera block if your cast is still asleep in bed, and that's why Paul went mad at Craig that time.
I genuinely was angry. I was pacing around. You've got a crew standing there, you know, and I mean, it's discourteous, and it costs money. And you've got the rest of the cast, and they're all beginning to, they want to see, is he going to get away with this? Because maybe if he gets away with it, then why should we any of us turn up? So I had to make a bit of a thing, but I didn't want to do it in front of everybody, so I went out and waited for him on the steps of the building.
Car pulled up outside the BBC and Paul's pacing.
Paul Jackson grabs him by the T-shirt
his lapels were sort of drawn above his head.
And he went like that, and the T-shirt came away in his hand. He's left holding this T-shirt that he's just ripped from my body, like, and I'm like, and that kind of did diffuse that situation a little bit. He had to laugh.
Just think, it's only 25 years ago. I mean, you couldn't do that today, could you? Can you imagine what would happen today? I'd be on an anger management course, a reprimand, you know, there'd have been police called in. Thank God there wasn't.
But he was brilliant. I think he's great, absolutely great. He knows everybody, right down to the cleaner. And it'd be 4 or 5 years later, and he'd still know their names. He's fairly tolerant. He's very helpful and patient.
To try and drag us all in the right direction, it must have been like pushing a Rolls Royce uphill with the handbrake on. And we kind of needed sort of that rod of iron that Paul Jackson was, really.
I don't think BBC Manchester was quite ready for Red Dwarf, you know, and science fiction. We were working in a studio which did one other TV show, which was Question of Sport.
I remember a makeup lady we had, didn't like her at all. She was a stuck-up. She was very stuck-up. And she was doing my makeup. She said, I don't know who any of you are. She said, I never watched television.
Another thing that always reminds me of the early series of Red Dwarf would be this. Would be that. Can we go again? Booming shot. Always. Absolutely always. In the middle of your best work as well.
We got into Manchester because we couldn't get into London, and we used the people who were available because we had to.
In those days at the BBC, to a certain degree, you were allocated people. You know, you had a programme and people were allocated.
Now, as it turned out, eventually, you know, some good people came to the surface, but initially it was, you know, these weren't people who were interested in doing anything like Red Dwarf. They weren't excited by it. It wasn't their forte.
Once a month you had schedules meetings where the boss went and got the list of programmes, and he came back and said, we've got this programme called Red Dwarf. It's some sort of science fiction show. I don't want to do it, and the other guy didn't want to do it, and I was a junior, and they just said, you're doing it.
Ed Bowie gave me a tape of Dark Star, and it's, as far as I was concerned, it just had the right feel for two men alone in space.
We thought we'd make it easy, so we'd all be on the same page, and we said, make it submarine-like.
I also remember when I was a small boy, I was at a boarding school. This was during the war, and everything was dark. The towns were dark, the roads were dark, including especially in the country. And all you'd hear was sort of a hiss from a gaslight. And somehow that sort of, I remembered that. And I just wanted this feeling of isolation and dark, of shades of grey.
I think Ed treated it maybe like he'd treated other shows and just expected the set to show up, and you needed to be there much more going, hang on, this needs dressing, this needs that, this looks like wood, blah, blah, blah. But by the time it was up, we were there ready to shoot, and there was no time.
We had our Starfield and whatever, although they were really Christmas tree lights, and they failed with about an hour to go on the very first show, and they were all in series, and it was sort of 200 or 300 of them, and we had no chance of finding out which one had gone. So we had to go to plan B, which is get a bit of black drapes, punch holes in it, put a piece of white card behind it and backlight it, and which is why the stars never move. They don't even twinkle.
We kind of thought that everything would kind of take care of itself, and it doesn't. I remember Doug having us all racing around on the night of the first recording. I think the pre-VT, actually, it was before the audience were in, getting coloured chairs from the canteen in the beam just to get a bit of colour in.
Rob and Doug are very, very hands-on as writers. Again, much more common now. It wasn't so common then. The old style, literally, you know, a writer would write a script, send them in to a producer, and probably not see them until they went out on air, literally in some occasions.
It was very much at the beginning, don't say too much. You can make so many points, and you have to be right every time. And then, of course, as the weeks passed, you know, you built people trusted you, and then you could do more and more and more. But in those early days, it was very much gently.
The writers would say to me, Donna, can you help us and go out doing a bit of shopping? So I used to go out after the read-through. We'd do a block and I'd go out shopping to get little bits and pieces to add just a bit of colour to the set. And I had to do it in secret because I didn't want to offend Paul. And I think there was one point where I think Paul nearly caught me because I was in the camera room taking out camera cable like this. And all of a sudden Paul came up to me with his pipe and just stepped over. What are you doing, Donna? I said, oh, nothing, just tidying the cable up because it's a bit messy. OK, and he walked off and I couldn't believe it. I was carrying on, throwing it onto the set and walking off.
The people come from Manchester, from everywhere, and we'd rehearse it with like little lines on the floor to denote what rooms we were in and stuff like that. And we'd do a full dress rehearsal and they'd be writing things down, and you'd have John Pomfrey there going, yeah, we're going to need a blonde hair, we're going to need a bit of a red hair.
You take copious notes, masses of notes, and draw little heads on the plan and whatever, and then go back to Manchester. I would then sit down at a drawing board and create a lighting plot.
And it was terrible, you know, if you were rehearsing that in front of people and they were like, you know, that was your reaction to it. And you're like, this is a comedy. Oh God, we're going to die on Saturday. We're going to die on Saturday. It's just got, oh, it's all going to be pants. Because they weren't great audiences, you know. But then again, they were doing their jobs, you know what I mean? They weren't concentrating on that. They were probably thinking, how am I going to get a light there? Or, you know, am I going to get the boom in there?
We rehearsed an acting, and then at I think it was on the last day of rehearsals, we'd all get on a coach, and the coach would drive us up to Manchester. And then we'd get off at Manchester, go into the hotel, do the 2-day shooting, following day, back in the coach, back down, rehearsals. It was weird.
Manchester every weekend, staying at this hotel, which I won't name, that I didn't like at all.
It had curtains, and you'd open them up, the curtains, and there'd be no window there. It was just some curtains put on the wall.
You know, a traditional big old, you know, truck of a Victorian type hotel.
I was there once, and the ceiling fell in on me while I was asleep. I woke up and the ceiling had actually plaster had collapsed on my head.
This original hotel had sort of people of the night knocking on the door, you know, making offers.
A particular activity that I have to say we did not get involved with.
Hello, would you like company for the evening? You're going, what do you mean? And then you realise who this plump Mancunian girl, what she was and why she was there. God knows.
It didn't happen to me, but it happened to several people, and so we had to move from that hotel. I remember that.
Yeah, so we moved on to the Midland, much classier, thank you very much. Had windows.
Good morning, Dave. It is now safe for you to emerge from stasis.
I've only just got in.
Please proceed to the drive room for debriefing.
We spent a lot of time planning things that were actually really important, as it turned out in the end. Like what the show looks like and how you even start it. What are the titles like?
The original idea was to start on Craig Charles painting the letter F, as it turned out. We chose the letter F because it was a convenient shape and we could fit the rear projection screen in quite easily. The idea was you'd start on a close-up of his paintbrush, pull back to reveal him in his spacesuit.
And you pull out and you pull out and you pull out. You just keep pulling out, all one shot, until you've got the whole spaceship. And it was going to kind of go like that, and it was all going to be one shot. But we couldn't really get it to work like that.
The problem was mixing from the letter F on the Red Dwarf logo, which was built about 3 feet high. We then had to match that to the letter F on the main model, which was only about 2 inches high. And the difference was too big. What we needed was an intermediate stage as well.
You can get around all this now, but those days it was like, you're mad, it'll never work.
I think because he was a hologram, Rimmer, that there was a bit of a debate early on as to how this was going to be, you know, manifested on me as an actor.
I know. I mean being a hologram. Do you mind? No, I mean being a hologram. Do you mind?
At one stage I was going to paint Chris completely blue. what I was going to do is key monochrome back into him, yeah. So he would be black and white. Didn't work. Anyway, by the time he finished editing on 1-inch tapes and you'd gone down to your 58th billionth generation, stuff started to look black and white anyway.
A show always brings a little bit of friends and family to it. But of course we were in Manchester, so not quite so much. I mean, there was numerous girls who'd been in the Hacienda the previous night coming in on Craig and Danny's tickets, obviously.
I think it was about 20% full. And I went out of the building and across the road to the pub, begging people to come across, to come in and see this show. And in fact, got half the pub.
Well, with the first episode, as anticipated, not that many people laughed at what they saw because that's not actually true, actually. They did laugh at what they saw, but we didn't have enough jokes in it, so we went back and put more jokes in.
The parts where Rob and Doug had laughed and Paul Jackson had laughed in the rehearsals, you're expecting laughter. And of course, when it's not howling back, you know, you're beginning to think, I'm doing something wrong. I'm useless.
OK, Modo, spell orbit. I've seen your reports. You cannot spell orbit. O-R-B-I-T. That is how you spell orbit?
You just had to keep mentioning to yourself that this is the first time that anyone's seeing this, and, you know, people aren't going to laugh immediately at it. It'll take a while to sort of bed in, you know. It's a TV program. Think about the audience who are going to see it at home.
There was no pilot made, which is a huge disadvantage because the great thing you want to do with a pilot is see what works, see what doesn't work, then go away and then rewrite all the scripts and work them based on what you've learned in the pilot.
I remember at the end of the show me saying, I got what I wanted out of that, and in the back of my mind I was going, no, I didn't.
The first episodes are always hard because you've got so many things to establish that you don't know, never mind that you've got to tell the audience. And secondly, with sitcom, you've got to lay pipe, but you've got to get laughs just like on an ordinary show. You know, you can't say to people, just watch the first episode so you know who everybody is, and then the comedy will come next week. You've got to get laughs as well.
You've lived with the script for so long that you're very reluctant to change any of it, and really probably most of it needs changing. We could see, as we were rehearsing it, that there were flat areas and it wasn't funny enough, and there were all kinds of things wrong with it. But we couldn't sort of bring ourselves to do anything about it until it was far too late.
And I think until it went out in front of the audience and got very, very little, that no one was really listening. And in fact, I remember the second show, and Paul gathered Rob and I together, and he said, I've got one note to give you. And I said, more jokes. And he said, yeah, more jokes.
At the end of the recording of the first series, we had a spare recording date, including a day's preview, so we could do a whole another show.
And I knew it was there, and I think I maybe even discussed with him and say, you know, we might have to do a 7th script, and that actually wasn't really very practical. So we devised this rather cunning plan of using that last week to go back and do pickups for the rest of the series. And again, you know, because the BBC worked in these blocks and kind of then didn't really monitor it very carefully, nobody noticed, in effect. We just delivered 6.
4th engineer, Grace Allender. I never knew you, Grace. I'm really sorry you're dead. That scene where I was acting so terribly crappily, my timing was just all to pieces, really. And it didn't really help the pathos of the situation when you're surrounded by little plastic swivel bins and things like that, which keep going, swinging backwards and forwards, and it's so obvious it's like a kitchen bin.
And I think it might have partially been my fault, because then in those days I thought, well, swing bin, that's kind of cool. We'll put the canisters in a swing bin. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? No, actually, it's not amazing at all. It's stupid.
We really liked that scene. I remember I particularly was fond of it because it was kind of poignant, and you didn't really need poignant. I think what you needed to do was make bloody people laugh so they'd tune in next week. So we lost it, and it was better for it.
Todd Hunter, yeah. Oh, he was great, yeah. He was really good. He put a bet on a horse called Holly, £1, and he gave me the ticket. And I'd never met him in my life. Well, I'd met him once before, you know. He didn't win, though, so he's all right.
See, although you are still a mass, you are no longer a vent in an event. Listen. Although you are still a mass, you are no longer an event. Listen. You are no longer an event in space-time. You are a non-event in time. You see? And you have a quantum probability of 0. You are no longer a mass in time. You've got to look at the... this is gobbledygook. This is gobbledygook.
Robert did actually only get that speech this morning to learn. That's true. So what a bugger to give somebody a speech like that to learn.
He took no great pleasure in getting it wrong. I suppose he was much more of an actor as opposed to an entertainer. And you know, we found it entertaining to get it wrong and come across as like we don't know what we're doing.
She still went to bed with me.
Yeah, because you had wonky vision. She thought you were some...
Take a breath, Chucks. Smelly patch anywhere, Chucks.
She still went to bed with me.
Yeah, because she had wonky vision and she thought you were somebody else.
Oh, God.
We wanted Mac because we wanted somebody who was funny and American. And in those days, there was only about 3 who lived in the country.
You know, a little nibble here and a little nibble there, Lister, and before you know it, we're flying backwards.
The first choice for Hollister, I was told, was Dame Edith Evans. And she was working, and she was very frail at the time. And those factors combined to her saying no to it. And then they decided to go with Stephen Burkoff. And he was doing a play in the West End. And then they got this idea to go American with it. And you know that guy in Malcolm in the Middle that plays Malcolm? Well, he wasn't born yet, and so there's no point in going with him. In the end, I got it because I was the only guy that could fit the fat suit.
I knew Mac from the days of performing on the circuit, you know, which I used to do, and he used to be the singing jukebox in Covent Garden.
I did an act with a loaf of Mother's Pride bread and a pot of yogurt, showing people how they could use them to make party costumes and nuclear Holocaust protection units and stuff like that. And so we all came out of that same stable.
What are future echoes?
How simple do you want this?
So Lister can understand it.
Oh dear.
Future Echoes was actually the 5th show we wrote. We'd written this series with this kind of axe over our heads. We weren't supposed to make it science fiction-y.
It was heavy on science fiction, but actually it was such a well-told story that it was fine, and it was a good end. It was a good, clever end that nobody could have guessed.
It was very difficult plotting it. It was a great deal of fun, sort of writing this scene where Rimmer plays the same dialogue twice. I enjoyed that.
But to rehearse, it was quite difficult because I had to work out how to intone the lines the first time. Because if you're doing them with the wrong lines coming back at you, it can sound different and wrong compared to what they should sound like. I'm not making myself very clear, actually, so I think you should just show them the scene.
I've decided when you go into stasis, I want to stay behind. I want to be left on.
What, on your own for the rest of your life?
What things?
Hey?
I said what?
What's going on? Great scene. Absolutely brilliant scene. That's when, for me, it's sort of thing, hey, this is getting really clever now. And funny. And I think I'm a bit more comfortable with the acting. Also, still not great, but a bit more comfortable with it.
It's quite tricky to rehearse somebody being themselves twice in the same scene. This is you being number 1 and you run in and do this, and this is you being number 2, you run in and do this. Trust me, it'll work.
In position.
It's really freaky, isn't it? Rimmer! I've just seen you walk out of that door.
What?
You get to a point when you're doing sitcoms that you can just organically know when you've got a good show, and Future Echoes was a good show. The audience reacted really well, but they reacted really well for a reason. It was a good show.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. That's actually the end of that episode. As you can see, the credits will roll over that. Polaroid, thank you for being such a fantastic audience. That is the best audience we've had in the 4 shows so far. Or maybe it's the best show, I don't know. But anyway, it's got the best response.
This is you aged 171, Dave. That was really cool. I was in makeup for days. And, yeah, because they sort of aged me with, I think it was latex, I don't know if we'd reached latex yet. It was probably paper mache.
We had to think of what Lister would be in, 100 and whatever it is years. We wanted to leave a positive message that, he'd lived an adventurous and exciting life and things had happened. It was kind of like a trailer for, stay tuned to this series because, it gets better. It was sort of like that. So we gave him a robot arm and things so that he looked like he'd lived through it.
Lister's space bike. Yes, that was a Sinclair C5, and we removed the bodywork from it, and we placed a pair of drop handlebars on it, and we dressed it in the finest BBC visual effects department style with silver tape and spray paint. It would do 15 miles an hour or so, and in a tight little studio, that was pretty quick.
Because it was like a really cool machine, and it was great for going down corridors and all that. Because I remember at the top, Red Dwarf was supposed to be 15 miles long, and, you wouldn't walk it.
I'll try my best, George. It's just that it's a bit tight there.
Craig, actually, to his credit, was pretty good. He would hack round corners and then stop and then hack round the same corner again, and we'd try and take a different angle to make it look like there were lots of corridors, because we wanted to make Red Dwarf appear to be big.
The Red Dwarf model, the original model, was built by Derek Hendon, and they were a company that did bits and pieces of model making for the BBC over the years.
I said, it's not going to be one of those spaceship shows where you're racing around shooting Klingons. And the ship can be a big, bulky mess of a thing. It's a mining ship, and it can have, a huge meteor in the side of it that they're mining as they move along.
Well, we were trying to make it so that it was self-regenerative, so that the scoop would collect debris as a form of power source. But also, if you had this big rock in the side, you were mining that rock and using that rock as power to make the ship go.
Peter Wragg did a rough sketch on a bit of paper and passed it on to Derek, and Derek built what his interpretation of that sketch.
I mean, I love the ship, but we didn't mean it to be red. And so we saw this, and we said, what? It's red. Yeah, it's called Red Dwarf. And so I was a bit, oh my God, what have we done? What have we done?
When the model turned up, it was essentially a giant red brick. Originally, it was going to be maybe a long ship with interesting jutting out bits. It turns up as a big squat thing.
We went away and thought about it and chatted it over and saying, can we live with this? Will we respray it? And we got used to it and thought, well, actually, sod it, yeah, let's do it. It's different and it's unique.
The main problem for me was that there wasn't really anything particularly interesting sticking out of the ship so that we could get the camera through to create a real sense of size, because it was meant to be something like 5 miles long. So it became a more tricky shoot than I'd envisaged. The Red Dwarf spaceship approaches camera, and then the camera sinks below it and it trundles overhead. Unfortunately, the model hadn't been built for that. It had no underside detail, so we had a couple of guys from BBC Visual Effects, Tony Auger and Martin Geeson, who had to go out to, I think they went to Hamleys and bought a load of extra model kits and stuck them on and then sprayed them, which is why the underside looks a slightly different colour to the rest of the ship, because it wasn't obviously sprayed with the same paint.
I was comparing at a comedy club called Jongleurs in London, and I was approached by a very tall man when I was having a drink in the interval, and he said, have you ever done a warm-up for a TV show? And I said, no. And he said, you'd be good at it. Do you fancy doing one? We're doing this new show called Red Dwarf. And that was Ed By.
Sexiest? Okay, here we go. This is my sexiest fake, Steve.
And what he used to do was do competitions with the audience and give them bits of wood as prizes.
In our show, if the warm-up guy wasn't good, the guys were merciless because they did stand up, so they were merciless. And Craig was known to take the microphone and tell a few gags So Tony was the only one he never did it to because he had his own style and he was funny anyway.
Well, we don't have time to do a warm-up, so, well, I'll just...
Eddie is hard with the warm-up for us, and we sacked him. Do you know what I mean? He just doesn't get any laughs. You haven't got time to do the concepts that Eddie sort of tries to weave on stage in a warm-up slot, you know.
Oh, no, it's not.
A little bit of a showbiz discussion here, really. I'm in room 461. That sort of thing.
He just did lots of small roles. He was a voiceover of a vending machine, he had a banana bomb, he was Caligula.
It was very much like a team. And even as the person that does the warm-up, who's normally just feels very outside it all, they were very good at including me in and making me feel part of it.
You know, he used to get back to the hotel and he'd play that, you know, that Les Dawson piano where he'd play the wrong notes. And so there'd be sort of a bar mitzvah going on in the hotel or something, and then Tony Hawks would be playing da 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 dee da da ding da, ding dong.
It was great to watch people wince as they were trying to check in. Jesus, who hired that man?